The coalition is pushing ahead with its plan for a nuclear-powered future. The party has released some details as to where these reactors will be built and how long it will take to get them established. But there are still a lot of questions over costing and if this move is actually achievable in a good time frame. Is there broad support for it? Well, joining me now is RedBridge Group Director, Simon Welsh. Simon, great to see you. We know how fierce the political arena is when it comes to debating this particular issue, but what have voters told you this week?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Yeah, it's interesting. I think I would consider where we are now as we're at the end of the straight of the first lap of the Melbourne Cup. There's a long way to go, but the horses are kind of settling into the rhythm. And what we're seeing at the moment is the old a third. About a third of folk are open to the idea and supportive, about a third are unsure, got questions, and about a third are against. That sort of headline probably isn't that helpful, but I think what's interesting is what's happening within each of those sort of three categories, if you will. And what's happening there, I think, represents some real headwinds for the coalition on this policy. So what we're seeing is those in that support category, about that third, give or take, are quite firm at some ends of that spectrum, but there is a significant amount of that support that is soft. And one of the key sort of softness in that support is this sense of, well, I don't think it's going to get done anyway. I can't see the communities, I can't see the states sort of aligning and this happening. So, will we just end up wasting 10, 15 years on something that doesn't end up happening? So there's softness in that support. Versus at the other end of the spectrum, the opposition is quite strong. And it's primarily sort of based around concerns around safety, well-being, Chernobyl, The Simpsons, those things keep recurring in the groups.
Really?
And if you're worried about that kind of stuff, if that's your motivation, it's pretty hard to shift people away from there and convince them that, that this is going to be safe. Not impossible, but hard.
Sure.
What's really interesting is this group in the middle. And this group in the middle, they can see the pros, they can see the cons, and they'll talk in the groups about both. They're quite open to the idea of more reliable and ultimately cheaper power in the long run. You're quite open to those ideas. The problem there is that when you then put a choice to those sorts of voters around, would you rather renewables or would you rather nuclear? That choice skews so heavily in favour of renewables. It's in our sort of quantitative work, it's a factor of about 3 to 1.
Why?
For every,
what do they love about renewables so much?
It's the sense it ties into the safety, that we can have sort of a sense of security in energy. I'll come back to that in a second, without sort of the risks and compromises of nuclear energy, the waste that comes out of that, and those sorts of things. The reason they see security in that is because fundamentally what they're sort of concerned about at the moment around supply security and even costs feeding into this is this sense of it's a supply problem.
Right.
Our supply isn't big enough and it isn't diversified enough. And people will talk about this, gives you an idea of how serious people are taking energy and energy costs at the moment. They will talk about these sorts of ideas of we need to diversify our energy mix because that provides us an insulation from those big energy companies that keep ratcheting up the prices on us. If there's more supply in the market, if there's more competition in the market, there's more sources providing it, that as consumers will give us protection.
So there seems to be a disconnect between voters and big energy companies, and that fits in with, losing faith in all institutions, politics, journalism, banks, the church, all that. But renewable energy is still run by pretty big energy companies, isn't it?
It's one of the interesting things around the renewable energy brand, if you will, is that it doesn't have that same sort of tarnish on it that, that the big energy companies.
Simon.
Exactly. There's a long way to go in this race. There's going to be claim and counterclaim on both sides. It's going to be quite a contest. But I think, sort of stepping one step away from the focus groups for a moment and talking about sort of the broader political strategy, I think this is the interesting thing is you had a government that was losing altitude very much on cost of living and those sorts of issues. And now the coalition has pivoted and given permission, in a sense,
Yeah.
for a debate around energy and energy policy, which I think the government
Interesting
would much
you
rather
say
have.
that. Yeah, I agree with you, and you can see that. I think Albo's got that message from the focus groups, and that's why he is bringing this up time and time again. Usually you concentrate on your own policies rather than airing, the opposition's, although, the negativity does work, we know that. But is Dutton getting any points for actually taking a risk and being bold?
Yeah. So there are particular voter cohorts where that, I might not even agree with nuclear energy, but, good on him for putting up some ideas. Absolutely. That's a really interesting story in itself. So, but it was happening sort of even before nuclear energy. So it's sort of started to happen around voice. So there's a type of aspirational voter who was very, very much important to Scott Morrison's win in 2019, that they were sort of scared off by some of the economic reform that Bill Shorten was talking about at that time, and left the coalition in 2022 because that they didn't think ScoMo was doing a good job and had sort of let down the country and let down their sort of sense of aspiration. The way he handled COVID contributed to their economic stress, those sorts of things. That cohort has started coming back to the coalition, and that's sort of been the key driver of their increase in primary that we've been seeing over these last few polls. And nuclear really cements that cohort.
Right.
Absolutely, there is a type of voter. Now, how decisive that cohort is, because as I say, these are sort of once Liberal voters sort of coming back home to roost. So how decisive that is in an electoral sense, I think is a different question. It certainly makes Labor's job harder. It certainly makes minority government harder, but there's probably not enough of them in those key seats to sort of return coalition to government.
All right, one final quick question here, because I think one of the things that this whole nuclear debate has done is concentrated the mind on renewables plus what? Because the government wants to focus on, almost 100% renewables. We know that's not achievable. They know that because it's in the targets. But by the time we get to 2050 and we're, there's a bipartisan agreement on net zero, there still needs to be 10 to 20% of that firming capacity. Whether that is, it's not going to be coal, but it needs to either be gas or nuclear or green hydrogen. Green hydrogen, not economically viable at the moment. Batteries, not quite up to speed. Is there an understanding within these focus groups that firming capacity is required as well as renewables? And it's all tied to price?
Look, I'd say that's still, and all these ideas that need to be prosecuted over the coming period, that's one that does. That idea certainly doesn't come up that often in focus groups.
And that's really helping, isn't it? That's the thing. Right. That's not focusing the mind of voters at the moment as to what happens, and that's a potential opportunity for the coalition, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And it's so there's certainly sort of an understanding that we need a mix, and most folk at the moment, when they think of that mix, when I think about what we talk about in the focus group, what comes up, that mix in their imagination is probably more renewables plus gas for most folks. So whether Dutton can land nuclear as part of that mix sort of remains to be seen, the challenge, but certainly it's a renewables heavy future that most people think of when they turn their minds to it.
Always great to talk to you, Simon. It's been a pleasure. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Laura.